Hi, I'm Rob Rutledge. Welcome to our 11th Healing in Cancer podcast. I'm excited and nervous all at the same time. We have this amazing guest on today, Susan Wener, who is the author and very wise woman of a book called Resilience. I think you'll get to meet Susan and her incredible journey with metastatic colon cancer as we get into the story. It's really hard to summarize this wise woman's life, but she really came through it as a therapist, as somebody who's explored complementary medicine, as just a very wise woman. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm very excited about the kind of rawness and vulnerability and authenticity of her story and the incredible work and transcendence that she's worked at throughout her lifetime. So it's going to be an amazing podcast. Please stay with us. But as we go forward, so I should say hi, Susan. Good to see you, and thank you for being here.
So nice to be here. Thank you for asking me to join you.
Thank you. And I'm here with a dear friend, Dr. Timothy Walker, who's a psychotherapist and a really brilliant teacher here in Halifax. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm excellent.
Fantastic. And at this time, I usually ask, tell us something about your work world. Tell us something about your life in facilitating healing in people.
Well, yesterday, Rob and I actually had the wonderful opportunity to fulfill like a 25-year aspiration for me to bring, to teach the medical students at Dalhousie University in mindfulness. So we did a 3.5-hour workshop in mindfulness in medicine, and we covered a lot of ground. And it was really wonderful students there, so much great energy, and they were very receptive and open, and there was a lot of tears, and there was a lot of connection when people really did some empathetic dyads with each other. It was really beautiful to see. People were moved and appreciative. So it's a beginning of a new era that doctors are studying mindfulness from the beginning.
Yes, wonderful. And we will, Susan and I and you will address that issue of working with physicians, working with the medical system. But I am really encouraged by just the wonderful people and their heartfulness. It was the best morning I've had in 6 months. It was really just wonderful to be with them. So. Yeah. And Tim, on that same kind of spirit, would you offer us an opening meditation so that we can set an intention for this podcast together?
Yeah, let's do that. So, if we could all just sort of feel our seats, tune into the earth below your feet and your sitting bones, and really root your lower body into the earth. Go ahead, Rob. Do the chimes for each other. I'm noticing too that the camera doesn't shift to the person that's speaking, but might be all right. So we can feel our body and tune into the earth as if we're a tree with deep roots in the earth. And feeling what we feel in this very moment, without judging or editing, but really creating an open and loving acceptance of whatever it is that we experience in the here and now. And as we feel the earth below, we can also feel our spine like the trunk of the tree reaching up into the sky, and the crown of our head and our shoulders reaching to that open space which we can call heaven. So as we reach up and feel that inspiration of the open space of creativity, and feel our beating heart, our breath, that feeling of being alive. And as human beings, we're uniquely alive between the physical, material earth and the openness of heaven above. So we can reach out with our minds into that open space and connect with a sense of whatever it is that we think of as the divine. Contemplating that all of reality is one, and that we are interconnected always with that divine power that is everything at once. So as we open our mind and our hearts to that infinite vastness of heaven, feel almost as if those blessings are raining down and becoming one with this life, this body, this moment. We recognize that the life we live from moment to moment is never separated from the divine. And with our mindful attention, we can begin to come back to that feeling. We are never separate. We are always united. That which is transcendent is also immanent, here and now, in every breath, in every beat of our tender heart. Feeling that sense of blessings and connection, we can go into our hearts, generate love and healing, and think of all the people that are affected by cancer and the other people that suffer from illness. And we can send a light of love and healing, connecting with that divine energy. We share it. We send it out like a web of light from our hearts. All those people listening, all the people that ever will listen, all the people affected by cancer and other suffering. And in that context, then we can each individually, we can set an intention for our podcast. May this be helpful to others. May we learn and grow in the way that we need to learn and grow. So each of us can set our own unique personal intention. And as we drop that intention into our heart, we can feel that it radiates out like the sun rising in the morning, sending that light into infinite vastness, into the oneness. And then we can bring ourselves back and simply let go of visualizing or doing anything. Feel your body in the seat. Tune into your inner weather. Feel the breath of life. And we could lift our gaze, connect with each other, come out of our meditation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And in much better space now. So, Susan, reflecting on that meditation, I'm imagining that it was very natural for you from a very young age to be a therapist, to connect with other people, to have that natural inclination to give to others. And I'm wondering if you can even share that experience as an 18-year-old of being kind of so sick with mono that you had an out-of-body experience and what that led to for you. Can you start out that amazing story at that point?
Sure, but before I start there, I just want to say that for whatever reason, from the time I was a little girl, illness didn't really bother me. If people lost body parts, it didn't really bother me. I know my dad's best friend had lost a leg to cancer. And I would just sort of ring his doorbell and he'd say, "Oh, it's only Susie, that's okay. I don't have to put on my leg." And I'd come into the house, crawl up on his lap, and, just embrace him wholly. There was something, I just didn't even notice that he actually had a leg missing. And I think that there was an innocence about me and a naivety that I just felt that life was wonderful. Life was sacred. I was joyful. When I was a little girl, I may not have been considered the sharpest needle in the haystack. I was happy and playing and laughing. And I really wasn't that serious about my schooling. I didn't understand things that didn't apply to my life. I didn't know why they were important. And so I grew up basically contented. My mom said I was good, and G was good, and I was good. And I was happy with that. I didn't feel as though I lacked anything. I was really born on the sunny side. And then at 18, I became very ill. I had mono, and it was recorded as the worst case in Montreal without secondary complications. And I'm 5'5", and I went down to about 76 pounds. And I was sick for a very, very long time, 6 months, in fact. And just before I went into hospital, I must have become semi-conscious in my mother's big bed. And I had an out-of-body experience. I didn't see that notorious white light, and I didn't hear the voice of God. What happened was I sensed that my consciousness somehow left my body, and I was watching this entire scene from up above as though I were looking down from my ceiling. And I remember thinking, as my mom was sitting beside me, why couldn't I tell her that I was really okay? I couldn't find a way to express that I was fine. The words just didn't come out. But I knew at that moment that there was much more than I ever imagined to be possible. I knew at that moment that one day I would work with people who were seriously ill because I stopped being afraid. There was something about that moment that allowed me to not be so afraid. Now, in the years that passed, I realized that fear has so many layers. It's like an onion, that you just keep peeling them off. And every time you think you've conquered one, well, there's always another one sort of waiting for you to discover. But there was something really, elegantly peaceful and quiet and calm about that experience. And I remember waking up in the hospital. I was all wet, and I couldn't understand why I pressed the buzzer, and the nurse came in, and she dropped her flashlight and took one look at me and ran out screaming. And I thought, God, what did I do here? And what I didn't know is when all the doctors came in, I was covered in blood. I think all the infection during that experience had just opened up and left my body. And that was the beginning of my healing. I ended up afterwards going and talking about palliative care and becoming part and parcel of that whole effort to understand what it was like to have palliative care and to study it and to work with people who were ill and people who were dying. And I know it may sound strange, but I loved it. I wasn't scared. It was just where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, and like you, I can say the same thing is that those conversations with people who are near the end of their lives are very real and very authentic, and I don't find it scary. I actually find it very inspiring, and I can see a lot of spirit. And this may be a podcast about something that's bigger than what we see on the day-to-day. But I just want to recognize that, somehow there is some destiny here, and that is some fate in my mind, and we were both kind of drawn towards that part of our lives to be natural therapists. I really think that was chosen for you in some way or form. Can you go on to describe your life, as a young mom and coming up to your cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, I think, it makes me think, though, that we sometimes teach what we need to learn for ourselves, or we have the experiences first because we don't know what our futures will be. All I ever wanted from the time I was a little girl was to be a mom. I wanted to teach my children joy. I told you that I felt like that every day, and I really did. I would walk up and down the street, and they'd say, "Oh, it's just Susie. Let's bring her in and have cookies." And there was something beautiful and extraordinary about my life. I was truly happy. My sister used to look at my mother and say, "She's too good to be real." And she would be so frustrated and aggravated with me. But there was a basic innocence and a naivety that people were just good people. And I never seemed to get myself into big trouble. I just trusted people, and they never disappointed me. Okay. So I remember when I got married and I met my husband, he told me he had a 5-year plan about raising children and bringing them into the world, and I told him that Stalin's had failed and his was going to fail too. And 2 years later, Jacqueline was born. And, following Jacqueline came Catherine and then Alexandra, and I felt as though I were on top of the world. My dream was realized. I was full. I was completely happy and very satisfied. I didn't find it difficult. I didn't find it frustrating. My husband worked most of the time, and I handled everything at home, and I loved it. I loved it. And then, you think I had been very, very strong with my physical body my whole life. I was always athletic. The only thing I actually got excellent in was gymnastics and gym, and, that made me very happy. But I danced ballet until I was 27, and I thought that I knew my body. I thought I honored my body. I thought that I was conscious of my body, and what I realized was that I ignored my body, and I moved through pain, and it wasn't about, no pain, no gain. It was about being foolish, and I hurt myself. I ended up having my knees reconstructed, my spine fused, and I had a lot of other things along the way. But I'd always felt that those were physical challenges, they were structural issues, and I could deal with those easily. And somehow, again, I created a story around them. I lived with them, and I moved through them. That was just stuff. We could live through stuff. We could move through stuff. And I don't think that I was being heroic. I think it was just doing what I needed to do. And that happened, and I thought I was pretty strong until the day came that I found out that I had colon cancer. And it was a very strange and awful time. You hear people say on a regular basis they sort of know that they're sick before they're sick. There's something that you have a sensing of. And a few months earlier, before the discovery, I had had some hemorrhoids that were bleeding. And I remember going to the doctor, but I didn't just go with ease. I went in total dread and in total fear. And when he told me that's all I had, I was grateful, but there was something. I knew that there was something more than that. Mm-hmm. And then a few months later, it was discovered that I indeed did have colon cancer. And the fact that I had hemorrhoids was a gift for me, because they probably wouldn't have found it when they found it. So in some ways, I was lucky that was discovered. But I lost myself. This very sure woman who knew her place in the world, or who thought she knew her place in the world, became lost. The rug was pulled out from under my feet, and I lost my balance, and I didn't even know where to go. I had started volunteering in palliative care since I was 28 years old, and you would kind of think that I would be able to handle it better than I handled it, but like anything else, I guess, when that happens to you, you go through the stages of shock and numbness and fear, just like you read about. And although you may work in that field, you're not removed from the pain and the anguish and the suffering that a diagnosis like that brings with you. And my children literally grew up in a household where people were talking about cancer and dealing with it. And I remember the first comment I had from one of my daughters was, "Mommy, I thought cancer only happens to bad people. You're a good person." And I thought, oh no, no, it happens to people. It does not distinguish between age or sex or height or weight or religion. It's part of life, and part of life means that we have the opportunity, I guess, to experience it all, and we're not immune to any of it. But it was very hard for me. I went through that time where I had to not only fight for my children, because they were 8, 12, and almost 14. And I didn't really fight for my husband. I figured he was an adult and he would make it. He had tools, he had skills, he knew he would make it. He'd be sad that he would make it if something happened to me. But my girls, I didn't think that I had given them enough of me yet. And I really needed to give them more of me. And yet, how do you do that and take care of yourself at the same time? Because the truth is that illness is very narcissistic. You become the central figure of your drama, and your challenge is not to become intoxicated by your illness and to become defined by that which has happened to you.
Right.
And it was hard.
There's no doubt, and part of what makes your story real and authentic, it is that you're willing to describe these incredible emotions that are coming up with such depth and authenticity. And the other thing that is really remarkable from my perspective is your willingness to work on those issues. I mean, this is issues that you're thinking about, contemplating, working with over a period of time, over a period of years, and you're actually going to an integrative medicine program. You're learning from all the teachers on that front. You're exploring all sorts of complementary therapies. You're really doing your work, is what I would say. And because you're writing this book from 25 years ago, I mean, heck, you were 37 years old when you're diagnosed with
36.
36 years old when you're diagnosed with this colon cancer, and 25 plus years later, you have that perspective, and there's the psychological growth that happens. But the truth is, those emotions are so raw and so real that there's no escaping it. We can't bypass the suffering that happens through that type of experience.
Rob, somebody said to me, do you think that cancer has changed you? Do you think that you will live as that cancer patient for the rest of your life? And I said no, because I really don't feel like that. And although I've chosen to work in that field, and I face it on a regular basis, what it does is it reminds me how to live well, more than it does knock me down. But what I will say is that I really think that cancer scars the soul. It's a little bit like that scarlet letter, that there's something that happens to you, whether it's that loss of innocence that I had, and I still, my husband still sometimes says I'm very naive and I have a bit of innocence about me. But there's a loss. With everything you gain, you tend to lose something as well. And there was definitely a loss from this experience. It was a very hard experience. I always thought that I was a good mom and a sister and a wife and a daughter and a friend. I just knew without question that my claws would come out and I could fight for my family. But I didn't know if I could really fight for me, because I never really had to. Mm-hmm. I never had to, and therefore I didn't even know if I had tools or if I was prepared to do that or what that would entail. I only know that medicine could do so much, and I was given this wonderful diagnosis of a 95% chance of disease-free living. The tumor had started to infiltrate the colon wall, but it hadn't gone beyond it, and they thought, it's going to be fine. I did chemotherapy, which was very hard for me, and I had a bowel resection, but I think I would have jumped off a bridge had they told me to jump off a bridge. I was not equipped to handle any of this myself, and I think that all I wanted was somebody to take me by the hand, to give me a pill, to make it better for me and to just let me turn the page.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. And so I left the hospital, and it was funny because today is the Jewish high holiday, Rosh Hashanah. It's the Jewish New Year. And I left the hospital just before the Jewish New Year. And I said to my husband, I want to go to synagogue. And he said to me, really? Everybody is going to look at you and talk about you. And is this really what you want to do? Do you want to be so out there? And I said, there's something inside of me that needs to go to synagogue. Mm-hmm. And I never grew up with a well-defined belief system in God. I mean, my family was quite atheistic, and I just did my thing. It didn't mean that much to me, but boy, did I need something now. Yeah. I needed something so desperately that I had to create it because I never grew up with that. So I had to think about, how do I create my own concept of God? How do I try to feel that there is somebody or something holding my hand, letting me know that I'm not alone in the darkest of darks, letting me know that they are by my side. And I never expected a God to fix it for me or to make it better or to take it away, because I kind of had this idea that God gives us free will and we create the kind of lives we have, and he must be spending a lot of time crying up there. Mm. Some of our choices are not that stellar. But that's where I was in synagogue, and I remember listening to the rabbi saying at that time, God decides who shall live and who shall die, who shall be well and who shall be sick. And I thought I screamed out loud, not my God, but it was really quietly in my own head. Mm. And that was the beginning. I said, my God needs to be loving, needs to be able to see endless potential and possibility in my eyes, needs to remind me that I have that capacity, needs to be by my side so that I know I'm never alone. And I remembered when I was a little girl, I would put my little hand in my father's great big paw, and he would look at me with these gleaming eyes like Santa Claus. And I thought, that's what I want. I want arms wrapped around me, holding me the way I held my babies when they were in my arms. And I wanted that safety and sanity. And I may have made it up 26 years ago, but I want to tell you, it's as true to me as I know the sun will rise tomorrow today. Nobody can take it away from me. And it's become something that has really offered me peace and sanity. And I've had many people who, when they're dying, they'll come and they'll say, I want your God. I so badly don't want to feel judged or feel that I've done something wrong or I have to repent. I just want something that's soothing and loving and accepting, because I'm suffering enough already.
Yeah. And I want to reflect as well. There's a beautiful part in your book where I forget exactly what was happening, but you're having this real debate in your mind as to whether to really try to live or succumb to the illness. And you have this very powerful relationship with your dad, and his spirit's still with you in some way or form, but he was basically that God-like figure, that unconditional love, that kind of wrapping those arms around you. And it's such an incredible blessing to have someone in your life that really can just emulate that divine spirit in some way. And I just want to honor your dad, just from, because that brought tears to my eyes reading that part of the book. So thank you.
You know what? He was really, really a special man. He probably saw more pain than most parents should ever see from their children. And he just gave to me with his heart and with his soul, and I'm sure he suffered deeply, quietly in the privacy of his own home. But that experience that you're talking about is when 5 years after I had colon cancer, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I had 3 wonderful little tumors decide to take up residence in my right lung. And if I thought life was challenging before, it was so much more challenging now. It literally took my breath away. The first time around, I kind of thought I did everything right. I ate well, and I became, a vegetarian for 5 years, and I was so miserable as a vegetarian. I kept staring at everything that everybody else was eating, wishing that I would have, that hot dog or something. Not often. I didn't eat it often. I was a conscious eater, but I just wanted that, you know. Beans just didn't do it for me on a regular basis, and my poor family did not enjoy mealtime with me, you know. Mealtime at our home used to be a celebration, and now nobody showed up at the table, literally. So I tried to do the right thing. I went back to school. I learned different kinds of alternative medicine. I went to natural health consultancy school. I did 2 years of imagery and visualization, and I tried to do everything right. And I think the diagnosis of lung cancer was a real awakening for me again, because it made me go deeper, and it made me think that I needed to stop doing all the right things, and maybe I had to become the right thing. And I had to accept and allow that if I was going to die, I was going to die. And if I was going to live, I was going to live my way. So that physical experience of having a right lung removed, which is 55% of your breathing capacity, was daunting to a physically active person. I probably at the beginning became like a 110-year-old woman who had to sit down every time I took a step. I just couldn't breathe. And it was exhausting. And I remember crying in my father's arms and saying to him, I don't know, Daddy, if I want to live. I don't know if I can. And he never said a word to me. I literally was wet from his tears that fell from his cheeks. And he said, whatever you have to do, Susan, I'm here to support you. And that was a gift for me. I couldn't do that with my husband because my husband so badly wanted me to live. He would have encouraged me in all capacities because he loved me so deeply.
So much, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And also, I mean, there are so many topics to talk about, but one of them is the relationship with the daughters. And you know, when you were first diagnosed, kind of 8, 10, almost 14 years old, were the 3 daughters. It's probably a different, you know, trying to figure out exactly what they understand, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, 5 years later, I've just been joined by my dog here. 5 years later, you know, the kids are older, and you've tried to protect them. I'll just be blunt, and you can disagree with me, but you really tried to protect your daughters. You didn't share too much medical information from them, and I just wanted you to share, you know, what you experienced through that and your kind of conclusion about how much to share with daughters with time.
You know, I think I don't know that there's a right answer or a wrong answer. I think every case is an individual case. You know, you're asking me a question that's actually really hard for me to answer. I'm not quite sure how to answer it. I do know that Jacqueline, who is my eldest, basically told me that if I was going to die, it would be okay. And that she carried me inside of her. And that I would always be there for her and it would be okay. And that made me feel that I'd done a good job. That I had taught her a lot and that I gave her enough so that she could actually sustain herself. My middle daughter, Catherine, had a much harder time. It was very painful for her. I think she was extraordinarily close to me, and I was so conscious from the first time of having to try to separate some of those bonds and make her a bit more independent. But what I did do with her is it was going to be her year where she had to go out of town to go and do grade 12 in France. And I knew she had to go. She had to go for herself, but she also had to go for my sanity because I needed to focus on me. I knew that this was going to be a very difficult journey. And I promised her without question that I would be honest with her. Because I think there was a part of me that wasn't quite so honest. Not that I told lies, but it was non-honesty through omission. You know, I just preferred not to necessarily hurt their feelings or upset them. And this time they made me come really clean. I was to be honest. I was to be absolutely straightforward. And that would be the only way that they could live their lives. They could go away and they could sleep properly at night. So I had to be straight with them. My little one, I think she kind of did her own thing. I think in some ways Alexandra got the short end of the stick. I think that I gave her the least attention. And I think I allowed her friends to sort of help her grow up, and maybe her sisters to walk by her side. Many years ago, when she was in University of Victoria, I went to visit her, and I wrote her a letter and on the plane, and I gave it to her when I got there. And I remember I was crying because I said to her, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that this is what happened, and this was University of BC. I'm sorry that you got the short end of the stick, and that you were supposed to have this kind of life, and you got this kind of life, and it's sort of not fair, and I'm really sorry. And I remember she said to me, Mommy, you've made me what I am, and these experiences made me what I am, and it's okay. And I think the pain and anguish was more from me, from my heart, in feeling somehow that I had done this to them. And then I realized, I am just who I am, and my life experiences will impact them. And hopefully it impacts them in a way that encourages them to live the best life possible for themselves and for their children. But it wasn't always easy.
Yeah, I think that's also the takeaway point. There's no one right way. I typically recommend that if the kids are mature enough to have the open conversation, because they know something's happening. They can read the verbal language from their parents and so on, and it takes some of the mystery out of it as well. And so that kind of open relationship, understanding each personality, I think is really the best way to go. If there's a kind of best way, if there's kind of advice in this circumstance. There's so many other topics to talk about. Tim, do you want to add something to the conversation at this point, or should we go ahead and ask Susan to say?
I could ask another question, because a while back you said something that I think was very interesting, and it might be helpful to others. And you said that sometimes you become intoxicated by your own illness. I think that was very insightful, and maybe you could say something about what is the process by which, when you recognize that you overcome that.
I don't know that I really have an answer. I think time sort of helps you to get through that. But I think that, I found myself at different times almost diving down that rabbit hole, into that place where you don't want to be. You feel sorry for yourself. It's not my nature to feel sorry for myself, but there were times, man, I felt sorry for myself.
Right. It's inevitable. Yeah.
And I would go down that rabbit hole and sort of sink, and I kind of thought to myself, what do I do here? Like, what is my option? And I gave myself permission to be miserable for certain periods of time, but I think I did it with intention. The most miserable I was truly with lung cancer, because I was all alone. I was not allowed to actually be alone, but my husband brought me to our country home, and there I stayed for 3 months. All my girls were doing different things in the summertime, and he was working on the land, and I stayed locked up in a house by myself, basically, for 3 months. And I would look out the window, and I'd see this great big guy looking so agile, and he didn't eat properly, and he didn't take care of himself, and I became resentful and frustrated because I figured I had done all that. And look at him. He's running around like a gazelle and having a terrific time, and I feel like a little old lady. And I think I had to almost become sick of myself. I had to hate the way I felt. I had to be miserable long enough until I realized this is it. This is it. And once I made the decision that I actually really wanted to live, that I was going to fight, then I picked myself up and I put on my running shoes, and I mean, to walk a block was a huge effort, but I forced myself. I still think that there are times where we have to be very narcissistic when you're ill. You have to be able to move from being selfless to being selfish. You have to know that selfish means taking care of self. It doesn't have to have a negative connotation because you're not hurting another, but you are taking care of yourself. And this is your story. If not now, when are you going to do it? So you study and you learn and you read, and perhaps all your conversations are on one subject. And if you're lucky, you have people who stick around. And if you're not so lucky, they all walk away for a while, and hopefully you'll make a few new friends along the way, or family members who are sort of stuck like glue, don't really have a choice. They have to come back now and again. And you grow and you learn and you become. And then eventually you remember that even though you're ill and even though you're going through difficult processes, life still goes on. And life still exists outside your walls. And the sun still shines, and other people have issues, and it's okay. And you start to take the focus away from yourself and put the focus on living and on health and on well-being.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I think the wisdom in that is living through the experience. And why don't we go ahead? Do you have that poem ready to read?
I do.
Oh, good.
This is
context. Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Okay. This is a poem that I wrote in the book Resilience. Fear, and I just want to give you the context that the poem was written when they thought I had a third cancer, and I never go to see a doctor, please, on a Friday, and then be left alone so that you have to sit there all weekend wondering what you're going to do. First, you hear the words, "We need to check this out. Don't worry." Innocuous in themselves, these words offer no answers, nor hold any promise. Stated as if matter of fact, like you were verifying the air pressure of a tire. We need to check this out. Don't worry. Words, simple words, and yet the power they possess is undeniable, and the potential story they house, life-threatening. Don't worry. What a joke. How can anyone have the audacity to say that? Just because I appear strong. Just because I always manage to handle adversity. Just because not one but two kinds of cancer didn't kill me. Just because, in spite of it all, I basically happen to remain optimistic doesn't mean that at times it's not excruciatingly painful to be me. I shift between letting myself feel and being detached. I can sense my energy field closing in around me, doing what it can to protect me as if I were a sacred flower. This is an old pattern, a tool I used in the past, but it doesn't work for me any longer. What I need now is the exact opposite. If I could become expansive, perhaps I wouldn't feel the gripping in my throat, choking off my every breath. If I could become expansive, perhaps the pinpointed deep ache in my chest would allow my heart to beat more freely. If I could become expansive, I might imagine my belly opening, breaking free from the cocooned beliefs that no longer serve me well. I need to break the shackles that bind me. I need to explode the fear into tiny droplets of water that dissolve into the expanse of the endless sea. I need to remember the hope, the familiar light, the potential that is mine. My heartbeat begins to slow. My armpits cease their endless sweat. My belly finds its breath, and my soul once again timidly steps forward, willing, always willing to hold my hand and to take me home.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm reading along, but I also realize that process of expanding, that process of recognizing that your soul is walking with you takes time. This is not a simple fix. And I'm just wondering if you can share maybe the point where you're most terrified, or some talk about the kind of the the kind of human instinct of fear and, you know, what was helpful, what was the transition, how long did it take? The poem is so beautiful, but I realized that this is a process. This is even a years-long process to become expansive.
It is years. I think, you know, I think what happens is people have asked me many, many times, do you worry all the time about cancer coming back? When you go to the doctor and you have a checkup, do you fear what they're going to say? Do you live in between appointments, in between sessions? How do you feel safe in your body? And I think, I don't know exactly when that happens, but I tell them I do know it's possible because I do feel safe in my body. Mm. I think false positives help along the way. I think dips down into hell and back help along the way. I think feeling the fear and pain and anguish, and then something happens that just lights up your life, and for a moment you forget about it. That helps. I think the joy of family and friendships, they bring life together. I think sometimes it's simply the sun that shines and glistens on the trees that makes you remember that there's magic in the world and that possibility exists. I don't know that there's a time frame of how it happened, and maybe some people never get to that place where they feel safe and they go through their whole life having moments of peacefulness, but they can't seem to sustain them. And for me, that would be a lot more painful than what I've gone through. You know, I think that when I feel unsettled, I sort of say to myself, what haven't you done today? Have you had time for yourself? Have you eaten properly? Have you exercised? Have you done something that's quiet? For me, meditation is not necessarily sitting there and closing my eyes. For me, meditation is walking and seeing and breathing and just looking around in my environment and appreciating every moment. And somehow that's what pulls me together. When I go through the toughest times, all I do, I'm lucky I can put on my running shoes and I go out the door. And sometimes, you know, my husband will come home for dinner at 7 o'clock and I say, no, I'll be back in an hour and a half. And he'll say, what about dinner? I'll say, you know, help yourself or wait for me. But I know that I have to do this so that I could pull myself back and I could take care of me. I've learned never to blame another for the things I don't do for myself. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that I have to say no, and I have to stop. And that together gives me that sense of peace. And I want to tell you, nothing is written in stone. I had cancer twice. I could probably have it again just like anybody else. I'm no different than anybody else. Hopefully, my gift and joy of being alive every single day is so fulfilling to me that if that time were to come, I hope I'll be able to handle it with grace and with ease. You know, the last part of the book is about all the bowel obstructions that I suffered as a result of the surgeries. And there were times, I have to tell you, that they were a lot more painful than dealing with cancer. And there's a lot of things that people die from other than cancer. And the one experience I had with C. difficile was probably the closest I ever came to truly feeling what it was like to be dying. And it was very strange. It was the only time in my adult life that I didn't speak to my children for 4 or 5 days. There was no energy to find my breath, to say hello, and I wasn't in town. There was no energy to lift my head to take a sip of water. There was no energy to watch television or to hear the radio in the background. All of that required energy, and there was no energy. And in between the agonizing spasms and the trips to the bathroom and the vomiting, I had moments that were probably the most profound that I have ever experienced in my life. I had moments of the deepest sense of calm and peace that I ever had. And I almost felt myself like an ice cube simply dissolving. I was just disappearing. And you know what? The funny thing was, it was really okay. It was just very, very strange. And that experience left me with the understanding that no matter how deep your suffering, no matter how agonizing the moment, you still can have calm in the center of all of that. And that's just like that calm in the eye of the storm. You can have those moments so that no matter how bad it gets, you still have that possibility of a reprieve, even for a second. And if you have that reprieve for a second, maybe you could build upon that for the next second and the one after. And just work on seconds, just work on moments. And maybe each moment will build upon itself. And you might get, an hour now and again. And if you can do that, then you have something to work with. I think for me, the worst thing that could ever happen, if you said to me, Susan, what would be the worst thing that could ever happen to you in your whole life? I would say that would be shutting the door on possibility. Because if you shut the door for me on possibility, then you take away all potential hope. You take away all potential for what might be. And that, for me, would probably make living not worth living, life not worth living. It would be too much for me to bear. I'm still a dreamer. I have my absolute favorite poem in the world that goes like this. It says, everything was once and for a time a dream. The tree lies in the acorn, the bird waits in the egg, and the butterfly becomes in the cocoon. Dreams are the seedlings of reality. So to me, dreaming and possibility and potential, they all come together. And they make life worth living. We have hope, we have belief, we have faith. We dance in the magic of what might be.
That's just beautiful. I just warm to the heart to hear that the wisdom. There's so many things that come to mind. This idea that we shouldn't give our power to physicians. Physicians often think only in Western medical terms, and we don't want to give away the possibilities of finding healing at profound levels. So that's the reflection I hear partly in that. But I also want you to potentially even share, there's more to life than meets the eye. There's more to life than is in the Western perspective. And if you want to share that experience in Hawaii of the healer, that could be also a nice segue around this idea that there are possibilities beyond, what me as a Western physician might say.
Well, first of all, a little right lung that was gone was 55%, and I was only left with 45% lung capacity of a left lung. So I never was told that I couldn't do what I did, and I'm really glad that nobody ever told me, because maybe I wouldn't have done it. It's very hard to do what doctors don't believe is possible for you to do. And I ended up expanding that left lung to over 90%.
Yeah.
And my pulmonologist said, Susan, if it wasn't you and I didn't actually see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it, because I believe it's anatomically impossible. And I said to him, then you end up hurting your patients, because your limiting beliefs potentially limit their possible outcome. And thank God you never told me I couldn't do it before I did it. I did, by the way, ask him to actually use me as a case study in medicine, and he said he couldn't do it. It was beyond what he understood. But he would come to me if I was ill. If he was ill, I mean. Where to go. But, I had two extraordinary experiences with respect to alternative medicine that probably I wrote in the book, but most people would not believe it were to be possible, except, I have an A personality husband who absolutely had to live with them and deal with them. The first experience was in Hawaii. I took a master's of neurolinguistics, and I decided to go and see a kahuna healer. And this was pretty close to after I had the lung removed. It was maybe within a year. And I had a very thick, ugly scar from the middle of my sternum all the way across my right side to the center of my back. And the kahuna healer spoke in different tongues, and I asked a female teacher to come with me, I think because I was a little bit frightened. And he asked if he could put his hand on my chest. And he put his hands where the scar was, both hands covering the side of my body. And I actually saw the scar on his hands. And I was left with a thin pencil scar that when my husband saw, when I came back from Hawaii, he almost threw up on the spot and said, "I can't go there. This is more than my small brain can handle." And the scar never came back. And the other experience I had was I attended a conference called Clinical Applications of Behavioral Medicine in the States. And there were over 600 doctors who were there, mostly from the States. I think there were less than 20 from Canada. It was all about alternative medicine. But alternative medicine is big business in the States, so I guess it behooves doctors to know what's going on. And I did a 3-day pre-workshop of Qigong. Tai Chi is a form of Qigong, but it's increased energy for outward performance like martial arts. And Qigong is inward healing. It's increased energy for inward healing. And the group that I did was a group form called Chilel Qigong, which is group healing. And we had 3 spontaneous healings in the group. And I have to tell you, if one of them hadn't been me, I might have even been skeptical. One person had arthritis in their hand that was so bad that she couldn't lift anything. Her hand was literally clawed and twisted, and at the end, her hand was beautiful and straight, and she had movement. Another person had cellulitis in his leg, and by the time the 3 days were gone, his skin was beautiful and pink, and there were no more pocketed, infection. And then Luke Chen came to me and he said, "Can I put my hand on your chest?" And I thought, my God, my chest seems to be requiring a lot of attention these days, first from the kahuna healer and now from the Qigong master. And I said, okay. And the pain was agonizing. It literally took my breath away. I was shocked. But before I ended up going to this workshop, I had a wheeze and a whistle from having had a lung removed all the time. Now I speak with a bit of a hollowed sound because I only have one lung, and it sort of echoes a bit. But I was wheezing and I was whistling. It was very surprising, and at the end of this experience, it was completely gone. And when I went back to Montreal and I went to the pulmonologist, he said to me after taking an x-ray, "You had a complete shift in your thoracic cavity, and we are never going to discuss this again." So, it just I laughed almost. I didn't think, when I hear stories from other people, I just say, wow, I guess magic happens. And I mean, isn't it true from the beginning of time there's documentation of Christ touching people and they're healed? Or you hear stories of indigenous tribes putting poultices on people and they're healed, or medicine men or Aboriginal cultures. They do things a little bit differently. So to me, I just think that there's so much out there that we don't know, that we do ourselves a disservice when we limit our beliefs. Now, there's also a lot of garbage out there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I went to some healer once, and I remember it was very far away. I had to drive about an hour away, and I rang his doorbell 10 minutes early. And he looked at me telling me it was just as rude to be early as it was to be late, and I should go sit down over there in the corner. And then he told me, "I decide what people will pay depending on how I look at them, and I decide that you will pay the whole amount, the top amount." And I don't even remember one word he said or one word he asked me. I was terrified, paralyzed with fear. And why I didn't get up and leave, I don't know. I think I was so scared and vulnerable at that time, I just stayed there. but I can't tell you one word that he said. I have no idea. But you know, the medical community really, it's hard for them. You study something that's tangible, that's linear, that's scientific. You study something in a way that has a problem and potentially offers a solution, or you're looking for that solution. And I think that what the mistake is, and I consult on a gynecology oncology tumor board weekly, I think one of the mistakes is that we don't really realize all the variables that are involved in health and well-being. A person's belief system, a person's culture, a person's understanding of what they're doing, a person's idea, a person's nutritional health. You know, I mean, there are so many things that are necessary to be addressed, because if we were all the same, then we would all have the same result.
Yeah.
But we don't. So we metabolize medicines differently. And I think how we believe about them, you know, affects us. So for me, when I took chemotherapy, my mother, I told my mother, you can't be near me. For 6 months, I don't want to even talk to you, because all she kept saying was, you're poisoning yourself. And I said, I have to believe this is a magic elixir that's going to the cancer cells the same way the headache tablet goes to the headache. Otherwise, why am I doing it? And if I'm not in alignment, then I'm going to be having all the stressful side effects and issues that are going to make me miserable. It's hard enough to go through the process. I want to be in alignment with what I'm doing. And I think that doctors need to remember that they're part of a puzzle. They're not the whole puzzle. And faith and spirituality and friendship and walking and nutrition and gardening and golf, I mean, anything you want that makes you happy, you know, has to complete and fill that puzzle. And we need to create our own wellness puzzle so that we can thrive.
Beautifully said. So much wisdom. Tim, do you want to continue that conversation in some way?
No, I'm very fulfilled by what you're saying. I think it's excellent. Very articulate, and it's really beautiful to hear you talk about it. Gone the limit.
Yeah. Yes, and this is, you know, this is 25 plus years of lived wisdom is really what I believe. And that just, it's why the book, I really think, is such a wonderful book. And we've only touched upon, geez, maybe a quarter of the issues that you really delve into. And, you know, through your life experience, it's just absolutely wonderful to hear. Would you lead us in a closing meditation or visualization, Susan? I know you have the expertise and obviously a great spirit, so we'd really be honored to hear from you.
I would be honored. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And if you see my eyes closed, just know that I'm closing them because I don't want distractions. Okay? So if you really want to open your eyes and peek, feel free to do so as well. Close your eyes and allow your body, in whatever position you're in, to try to find its point of comfort. Feel yourself supported by the chair. Lie down if you choose. Move into any position that makes you feel calm, quiet, and safe. Know that you may hear noises or you may hear distractions, but allow them to just come through your mind and simply let them go. Because you have nowhere to go right now, and you have nothing to do right now. This is a time simply for you. I want you to focus for a moment on your breathing, finding your body's rhythm and imagining letting go of anything your body doesn't need. Allow it out through the exhalation. Anything not needed for health and well-being, simply allow it to go. Making room, always, for that which you want. Letting go of any worries or concerns, any illnesses, any bacteria, any stressors. Just allowing them out on the wave of an exhalation. And then taking in all that you choose. Smiling inside, imagining how the Buddha's bellies are so full and so large, with hope, with belief, with joy, with laughter, with potential, with possibility. Take in health and well-being. Take in peace and calmness. And just focus, just for a moment, on your breath. And now I want you to imagine yourself on a beautiful white sandy beach. The temperature is perfect for you. All the UV rays have been filtered out, so you're safe and you're protected. You might hear the seagulls in the background. You might taste the sea air on your tongue. And as you walk along the beach and you turn a corner, all of a sudden you see an extraordinarily comfortable chair and a cool glass of water waiting for you. You sit yourself down. You lean your head back and your eyes drift upward towards the sky. As though by magic, a lens seems to cover your eyes, and you look directly at the bright, shining sun. You imagine reaching your arm up, reaching it so high that it has the capacity to grab a fistful of sunlight. And then as your arm retracts, you hold this sacred gift in your hand, neither warm nor cold, but a perfect temperature. And you bring it close to your chest, feeling all your organs moving to the side, making room for this little ball of sunshine. This ball of sunshine is going to stay with you now and forever, to help light up your way in the darkest of nights. But more than that, every time you inhale and exhale, the rays of the ball of light extend throughout your entire body, going from the tip of your toes to the top of your head, melting away anything not needed to ensure health and well-being and balance, allowing your body to have a guardian, the gate, within it, now and for always. This little ball of sunlight, some might call God, some might call energy, some might call faith, some might call spirit. It doesn't matter what you call it. All that matters is it's yours and it's within. Breathe it in quietly. Breathe in peacefully, knowing that you're safe and that you're looked after. And during times of sadness and during times of distress, imagine two hands coming out of this ball of light and allowing those two hands to cup your heart and to cup your soul, knowing that now and forever you are safe. Breathing gently in, breathing gently out, feeling calm and peaceful as you bring your awareness back to the room.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Well, how can I thank you? I just wish you and your family much happiness and health at the beginning of this wonderful Jewish holiday. And it was such a pleasure to meet you, even just by podcast. And hopefully we'll cross paths again. So thank you so much for your great gift. Really, thank you.
Thank you both so much for inviting me. And my wish finally is just that people know that anything is possible. Okay? Life is not about what happens to you. Life needs to be defined by what you do with what happens to you. So everybody know, make good choices. The world waits. Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you.